I had the privilege of getting to take a few months out after my ministry job finished in May, and I had a couple of months where I was in. My parents live over here now. My mum came back, and I was in their house, and I got to meet pastors and leaders and pray and spend time just listening to a country that has always felt like home, because I spent so much of my childhood here, but has never actually been home, because I went to school. I was brought up in Scotland. My fear for Northern Ireland, and my greatest prayer, is I feel that there is a huge division going on between the generations, and that we have become so entrenched in our rightness, which is often right and is often theologically correct, that we are losing the 18 to 30 generation from the churches. As I said, I was a young adult pastor, a student pastor in my last job. And Ruth Perrin's done some great research with that generation across Britain. And the one thing that comes across again and again is that the reason they're leaving the church is a lack of authenticity. And it's what I see more and more in my own research and in people with mental health not being able to speak up. And I feel that actually there are times where and I am the worst for this because I am a talker, as anyone who knows me will attest. We need to actually stop speaking and start listening, and start loving and caring and opening in arms. And that does not mean getting rid of right theology, but it means that our love and our care is as much our right theology as our words are. And I feel that in doing that gap between the generations, that gap of incomprehension, which I see often going on, can be bridged, and more people can, I believe, come back to the heart of the Father, to the God that loves them. Hi, I'm Joy. I am a practical theology lecturer here. I'm obsessed with Italy, particularly pizza, but only from Naples, not from Rome. And I love being a geek and reading lots of books, like any theologian, and travelling and dogs and the seaside and pretty much everything. I love life. It's been an interesting journey for me, spiritually and denominationally. I grew up in a Presbyterian church, in a very charismatic family, in a not charismatic church. Grew up through YWAM and YWAM affiliated organisations. Discovered a lot about kind of that aspect of kind of tangible expression and experience of the Holy Spirit. But I've worked for and worshipped in conservative evangelical, Baptist, Presbyterian, and most latterly an Anglican church, and I loved them all. They were all had that central focus of loving God and loving people, and a passion for the Word, and a passion for worship, and in different forms, in so many different forms. And I feel like that's influenced my theological leanings as well as my spiritual journey so much over the years. I have been known to call myself a Presbycostal, and that's probably the closest that you get to defining me. Yeah, well, I actually went to uni to study English and French. Having been told, I know that I'll have many evangelical students who'll come in with the same thing: don't do theology, you'll ruin your faith, you'll lose it. And so I went to study English and French because I loved books, and that was what I wanted to do. And I wanted to be a teacher and a writer ever since I was 3. Never really foresaw that I could become both of those things by doing this. And I accidentally picked up a theology course and loved it, and then picked up another one, discovered I was getting higher grades and I'd gotten anything else, and I got to write about Jesus. And my home had always been the sort where over the dining table we talked theology all the time, and I just found home. So by my 3rd year I was doing theology single honours. By my 4th year my professor said, come back and do the PhD, and I said no, I'll never do that. And he winked and he smiled and he said, yeah, we'll see. And 7 years later he was right. So good mentors are important, because he saw a theologian in me when I did not see that at all. And I'm the happiest theologian in the world, I think. So I'm a lecturer in Practical Theology, which means that I get to teach on basically the stuff that is the practices of the church and the world, and how those intersect. And realistically, that means that in my research, I'm teaching a lot on pastoral care, mental health, suffering, sadness, the things where I really feel that the church has just such an opportunity to be a witness and to be a blessing, because it's not just pastoral care, it's evangelism as well. And I'm excited about that, and I'm excited about living that out with the students and caring for them. I love that about a Bible college, that we're not just teaching them in lectures, we're living alongside them and equipping them and encouraging them and nurturing them, I hope. And that I can take all the things that I've learned over the years by so many incredible men and women in my life, and give it back to these students would be the dream. And I will fail, of course, but I hope we laugh a lot along the way. So all of my life just came together when I applied for the PhD, and if I'm honest, I can't say that I really saw that before then. It's almost like God had a plan. And it's been spent in social care, in pastoral care, in education, and in ministry in various roles. So after I left uni, I did an internship with a church in London for a year. I then went and worked for the Presbyterian Church in a pastoral role for a couple of years. A wonderful little community. I then lived in Italy and taught English for a few years whilst worshipping and working alongside my latterly a little church in a hard area of Naples, which is still my home, my second home. I go back as often as I can and worship with them and pray with them. And then I worked in Birmingham for an Anglican church as a student pastor, running an internship, caring for the students, and teaching some theology on that as well. So all of these elements have played throughout my life, and now I'm here. It's just amazing because I get to use all of them. God is amazing, even when we don't have a clue. Sometimes He always does. So yeah. My PhD ties together everything that I've been talking about, which was why my life suddenly made sense when I applied for it. It's on depression in Pentecostal charismatic churches. So it's looking at what it's like if you're in a church where you're expected to encounter and experience your faith in tangible ways, and you can't. What does that say? Not only about how we can care better within those churches for people with depression, but what does that say about our theology? I firmly believe, and this is something that comes from my disability theology background, that there is a prophetic voice in suffering and in weakness that we often don't listen to. And so my PhD was looking at the theology of one of my many traditions, but my main tradition, the charismatic tradition, exploring the role of the Holy Spirit in suffering and pain. And the Ruach in the Old Testament is never mentioned with happiness, but often in suffering and often in pain. And so there's so much that we can learn from the lives and stories of those who have lived with depression and held on to their faith, and that's what my PhD was about. And out of that research came a real passion for mental health in the church, for pastoral care, and also for how the church responds to abuse, because there are so many connections there, and I feel that's an area where we haven't spoken up enough, and we need to learn to speak better and to care better for one another. So those would be my research interests: Pentecostal theology, qualitative research, because that was the only way I could study what I was doing, and I began to see the potential prophetic nature for that kind of research, meaning research with people, research where you speak to people and hear their stories and use those stories. I think dependency on God is something that we all struggle with and are challenged by at times, and through the roles in social care that I had, I've grown a real passion for disability theology and for the ways in which those who are frequently marginalised, those with disabilities, those with mental health, honestly, those like myself who do not always easily fit into the evangelical subculture that we've created, can fall through the gaps, particularly when we're passionate about church growth in terms of numbers, in terms of success. And I feel like historically, having studied a lot for my own research on revivals, those tend to happen where and amongst the marginalised, amongst those who are suffering, amongst those who are outside of what we would expect to be the norm. And I think the way that the church can respond to that is first by owning that and being aware of that. And then by learning from others. You know, we're so quick to speak and so slow to act sometimes. I think it is particularly here, I think often people have heard the gospel, but we have not always seen it. We have not always seen it in the lives of those around us. And that's why pastoral care is my passion. It's not, I actually did better in systematics at uni in doctrine, but I really believe that this is our evangelism, this is our mission and our ministry. And again, I wrote my PhD whilst in ministry and realised that there are many ways in which I still have a lot to learn, and I'm excited about learning that together with my colleagues and with the students here. I'm already learning from them. It is a community, and it's a community unlike anything that I have experienced before, either in academia or out of it. It is everything that I have talked about, that I have longed for in this conversation. I see it genuinely in BBC. I see authenticity, I see care, I see colleagues who go above and beyond to care for me as a new lecturer and for the students. I see involvement and participation in the lives of the students and a heart of prayer and a heart of worship. And I've been here 6 months and I keep thinking one day I'll discover that it's not like that. 6 months, my goodness, I've only been here for 3 months. It feels like 6 months. It's real. It's just real faith. It's real faith lived out in the classroom, in the chapel, in the canteen, in the mustard seed. It's just real faith, and it's lived with joy and with so much laughter. There is so much laughter in our halls. And I feel that there's a calling within that for us to go out and to give that as well to others.